Chapter 16, Parts 1 and 2. Chapter 16, Tenuous Pacts. Part 1, Victory Bay, Kronus. To my utter relief, Selene arrived happily riding on the back of a Necron destroyer along with her mechanical bodyguard shortly before we retired to the HQ. Naturally, the first thing I did was to check on her and hug her. If her grin was anything to go by, she either wouldn't know what bullet she dodged or didn't care. She got a ride out of this mess after all. Her arrival did gather a moderately sized crowd. A few of the citizens even cheered uneasily until they saw me pick up the munchkin, at which point the predictable rapturous screaming began. The whole circus made the propaganda department in general, and a Lieutenant Regina in particular, very happy with the pictures they got. I made a mental note to check up on what insanity they were cooking later, however. For now, I had more immediate concerns. Bron, good you're here. I noted the surviving Ogryns shuffle slowly through the guardsmen surrounding us. I've got a job for you. You're to keep Selene here safe and tear to pieces the next thieving bastard who tries to take it. Can I count on you? The giant of a man beamed as if the Emperor himself stepped from the golden throne to give him orders and nodded vigorously. That's how Selene ended up on the bonehead's shoulder, still wearing her armor and with kneecapper in tow. This is precious. The propaganda lieutenant was grinning too and directing a camera crew to record everything. She was giving Scipio a run for his money in the bouncing department. Lieutenant Picos, I want a heavy weapons platoon in Selene's vicinity at all times. I will no longer be accepting excuses from people who can't stand to be near her. Am I clear? Recent events drove home the point that I had to straighten up my retinue status. Not that getting shot wasn't something I had to necessarily worry about. In practice, that meant getting Selene as much protection as practical. I'll see to it, sir. We won't fail you, the lieutenant promised and meant it. See to it that you don't. With this hopefully handled for the moment, it was time to go deal with another headache. Politics. We gathered for a last-ditch brainstorming session before the next round of negotiations with the Necrons. At Amberley's suggestion, we included General Alexander, Captain Thule, and Scipio for a simple and obvious reason. So we could use them as a litmus test on how the Imperium at large might react to some of the so far proposed points. Among the small group, only Scipio looked like he didn't want to be here. He could barely stay in one place and was ready to start bouncing off the walls in impatience. That's how it is. Inquisitor Vale summarized the Necrons' proposals. Even that wasn't enough to keep the Magos steady, however now we had his attention. Necron suggestions will force various doctrinal issues to come into open conflict. Scipio began. Some numerous elements within the Adeptus Mechanicus consider the study of profane xenotechnology a tech heresy, and those who conduct it, heretics. He explained with distaste. At the absolute best, they can be convinced to review xeno devices to learn how to better neutralize them. This faction is large and numerous. Even just conducting a proper study on the pylons, reverse engineering them, and building our own versions will be a tough sell no matter how useful they would be to the Imperium at large. He didn't need to convince us. All but Amberley saw firsthand how useful those pylons were. Also, attempting to study and then build weapons and devices based on either Necron or Tau examples will prove too much for too many traditionalists. This isn't technology recovered from a holy STC. It hasn't been created by human hands with the blessing of the Omnissiah. Scipio elaborated. However, you disagree, do you not, Magos? Captain Thule cut to the chase. I'm what you might consider Xenorite, even though I don't see myself as such. I am among those who see the blessings of the Omnissiah in all technology, human or alien. It's how the technology is used, and to what ends, that is the primary constant that divides tech heresy from the normal study of technology. While not quite a minority, our group and our allies are outnumbered by the other Mechanicus factions. Not all of them are hostile to our ideas. Unfortunately, many are. I was sure that this summary barely scratched the surface of the problem. However, it was good enough to illustrate what we would be facing if the alliance panned out. In that case, we should be careful how we present anything we gain from the alliance we're discussing. Will it help that we won't be actually building the Necron pylons, but our versions? I inquired. Perhaps, It would be a distinction lost to many a tech priest. However, I must raise a different point. I heard no mention of Holy STC. I must request you make the return and recovery of any such relics of the Omnissiah a high priority during the negotiations. That is an oversight we'll repair with utmost haste. STC recovery will be the first thing we'll negotiate tonight. Amberley vowed. Praise the Omnissiah. Scipio's mechadendrites danced in glee. General Captain, how do you see the consequences of a long-lasting alliance with the Necrons unfold? Lucas Alexander frowned mightily at us. Well, they're Xenos, he grumbled. With this out of the way, I can assure you that there are elements in the Guard who will appreciate not having to face them before we can get appropriate countermeasures to their technology, which went contrary to what elements within the Mechanicus would find acceptable. Upgrading what the Imperial Guard had as a standard kit with gear reverse-engineered from captured Tau stocks and anything the Necrons might offer would do nicely to lower the gulf of capabilities between the two sides. The damning thing was that I was sure the Mechanicus had the real nice toys, many more than they needed to, and kept hoarding them instead of offering the Guard better gear. Now, I wasn't born yesterday and knew that at least in part the issue was the fragmented and fucked up state of the Imperium industrial base. However, I had the nagging suspicion that this was less than an issue than the Mechanicus claimed. In that regard, trying to incorporate reverse-engineered alien tech on a limited basis might prove useful in judging how much the AdMech were fucking with the rest of us. Needless to say, that was a suspicion I've been keeping to myself. Some of my peers would be glad we can preserve forces that would otherwise suffer greatly in order to use them against other, more immediately dangerous threats. Others will find it hard to swallow not shooting at any. Xeno they could see. The presentation will matter a great deal, open backing from the Inquisition as well, so no one shoots him out of hand. You'll have our backing in that regard, Amberley reassured him. Captain Thule? The Blood Ravens has had to ally with aliens in the past to combat greater treats. This is no different. My primary concerns are how long this alliance might last, and is it a mistake to give our allies time to consolidate their position? Those are concerns we share, I told him bluntly. However, we're all aware of the military realities that caused this alliance in the first place, and of the existing correlation of forces. Thule wasn't happy at that, but let it go. It might have been different if we knew about the Necrons earlier and could catch them early in their awakening. The Eldar and Tau ensured such a thing didn't happen, and then there were the Chaos forces. There was no use to dwell over what-ifs. We had to play with the cards we had. General Alexander, what are your thoughts about a few of your units field testing reverse-engineered Tau war gear? I'm aware that the troops who fought with us in the Deimos Peninsula will be under extreme scrutiny. Thanks to the Necron pylons, we can avoid having to purge them out of fear of corruption. However, we'll have to keep a close watch on them anyway. Because anything less would have our Hereticus and Malleus colleagues going ballistic. Amberley hinted at that much. I think that we can work out something. Alexander nodded, showing the barest hint of relief. He knew what the Inquisition often did to forces who survived encounters with chaos. They either purged them or drew them in for their own use. Sometimes the Inquisition did both. That's good. Scipio? I'll be frank. The pylons are a potential game-changer for the Imperium at large. I'll be doing my best to push for their accelerated testing, revere engineering, and widespread usage after any unpleasant surprises are accounted for. I said bluntly, so there would be no misunderstandings. On that point, we're in complete agreement. This brings us to the second point. As you said, Magos Scipio, what we are proposing will be seen as tech heresy by elements of the Mechanicus. Because of that, we might as well go all in. We're considering agreeing on the Necron proposal for aid in capturing and reverse engineering Tau technology to use as our own if feasible. Amberley added, Personally, I agree. Those of my faction will likely back you up. However, you must be ready for a serious backslash. That is the best-case scenario. Duly noted. It was almost time to meet the Necrons and hammer down an agreement. Then we would have to figure out how to sell it to the Imperium at large. Part 2. General Alexader's HQ, Victory Bay, Kronus. The Necron diplomatic party appeared in a flash of dazzling emerald light, which dissipated slower than usual. There was a time and place for pomp and circumstances, and this was it. The Necron Lord had their best regalia on display, awing the humans. Tonight they intended to conclude the bulk of the negotiations, and they had to observe proper protocol. "Greetings, humans," Tsar of Tomorrow proclaimed grandly. "I present you with Amarkan, the Gatherer, Nemestor of—" Amarkan tuned out the cryptek listing all his proper titles. He had to order his friends to act as a proper herald and general aide tonight. Herald of Victory, similarly, had dragged one of his own crypteks to serve in the same capacity. Observation of the human discussion that happened shortly before their arrival was enlightening and forces some minor changes in the Necron strategy. If the humans were too busy killing each other over foolish reasons, they would be too busy to be useful allies. That wouldn't be a good state of affair. Now, finally, Amarkan was beginning to understand why his people preferred to enslave aliens, kill them or disregard them completely. Actually negotiating successfully was a chore at the best of times. Like now, his counterparts were willing to make a deal, even agreed that Amarkan's benevolence was stunning and great indeed. However, if they accepted his generous offer, their people might kill them. It was pure insanity. Nevertheless, Amarkan was going to make this work. He wasn't a Nemesor just for show. The exchange of titles ended, amply demonstrating that the two humans weren't experienced diplomats. They were both still in awe and offered only their most basic and relevant titles. Those were the perils of working with primitives. Amarkan decided it was for the best to leave it at that. "We understand that you will have certain conditions you need to hold on to and certain requests to make. Let us hear them, then we'll explain our lastest offer. As appropriate, we'll offer gifts in light of your service in combat, defending this world from hostile incursion." Herald of Victory began. It was an atypical and particularly bold gambit. Not to mention blunt, however, it was one likely to serve them much better here than it might during negotiations between dynasties. The humans looked at each other, and Vale nodded to the female to begin. Was this some odd mating ritual coloring the negotiations? Flesh, blood, and hormones made things needlessly complicated. Let's not forget Sticky, Herald wondered briefly. Amarkan barely paid attention to the expected request from the female Inquisitor. He was running predictions on the feasibility of tampering with an STC if they found one in order to provide the humans with basic tech that wouldn't get his principal allies among them shot. It might work in theory, however, it wouldn't be feasible for said technology to be easily recognized as Necron-sourced. No modern weaponry, which went without saying. However, a few ancient models, not to mention pylon tech, would go a long way if accepted, which was a problem from what the humans said. Their fanatics had trouble accepting technology not developed by the now lost human civilization to the point they were violent about it. Well, he had time to run more simulations. It wasn't like they had access to such a device to modify right now. "We can agree without issue on this point. We'll hand over to you any of these STC devices we might stumble upon. However, we'll require a clarification. What exactly is an STC, and how do we recognize it?" One of the new additions to the human negotiation team began speaking. He sounded almost like some courtiers Amarkan knew, painting everything with long-winded, meaningless words. Long story short, if he translated the rambling right, a standard template constructor was an AI-run library core containing the bulk of the human's technological knowledge. Those were extremely rare and practically priceless these days. Reading between the lines, Amarkan concluded that they were artifacts from a precursor human civilization, which might have been almost civilized, which had fallen 10 to 15,000 years ago due to the Eldari literally fucking and torturing the galaxy into ruin. The only really useful thing this Scipio Row 11 did was sending a data burst containing images of previously recovered STC fragments. Now the Necrons could more easily recognize them. That was the first point of agreement finished. Progress. Point 2 concerned the pylon anti-warp technology, which actually sounded better than anti-transdimensional technology. It was shorter, to the point, and ensured the primitives knew what you talked about. He designated it so from now on. For a second time tonight, the humans didn't tell the Necrons anything they didn't already know. Overhearing their strategic meeting on the topic was useful like that. We humbly request more examples of your pylon technology when they become available. Having access to multiple devices will speed up testing and help demonstrate their usefulness on a larger scale faster. Vale was saying it was a reasonable request. Amarkun could see how other humans might look at anything that happened in a world that was a Necron stronghold with justified suspicion. They would need to carry out tests at locations with no Necron influence. In that at least, the primitives were reasonable. We can agree, when we have enough pylons to properly neutralize the warp influence at the Deimos Peninsula, I will build more mobile pylons for your study and use. Herald of Victory promised. As a gesture of goodwill, I'll provide further information about the techniques used in the pylon construction in order to facilitate your own efforts. This meant that the humans either weren't advanced enough to do it by themselves in a feasible amount of time, or they had generally regressed enough that simply relying on them was a moot point anyway. Why couldn't the damn primitives just take the offered technology and cryptech assistance and build a proper infrastructure instead of this dancing around? Right, crazy religious fanatics worshipping technology. Amarkun couldn't even properly blame them on that part. Necron cults were worshipping Citan still, and that was undeniably worse than any human not entangled with the abominations from another dimension could ever do. At that point, the negotiators stepped back and left the cryptex, and the part human, part machine in red robes get the details straightened out. In fairness, a lot of the negotiations should have happened that way, below the level of the Nemesaur and planetary overlord, and beyond the direct intervention of the human inquisitors. However, the situation was anything but typical, and they couldn't risk their minions without close supervision. And at that point, they might get the important parts done themselves. While the technical discussion was going on, the four of them could tackle the next part of the negotiations. What to do with the blue aliens? I propose that we ask them kindly to pack up and leave while abandoning all industrial facilities and military gear. Vale suggested, if they agree, it will be for the best. If not, we would have tried talking and can remove them forcefully. We can engage their primitive ships in orbit if it comes to that. Their loss might force surrender without the need of ground combat that might damage useful infrastructure. Amarkun suggested, such a live-firing exercise would help gauge what the navies of this era were generally capable of. If the humans had a significant technological advantage in space, they would already neutralize the Tau presence in orbit. With their mobile forces crippled, the Tau ethereals in charge might be more willing to negotiate in good faith than usual. I must warn you, they'll suggest you join their empire so you can all serve the greater good together. Under their wise guidance, of course. The female human rolled her eyes as she said that. Amarkun wasn't sure what to make of that. From what he could gather, the Tau were at best a little less insane than the humans. Their madness simply manifested differently. He might send an envoy anyway. He was curious to see if the Tau would really make such a hilarious offer to the Necrons. As if they would willingly serve anyone or anything but themselves ever again. Your offer has merit. Amarkun eventually agreed. We will send an envoy. If the Tau does not follow up on our ultimatum, we'll neutralize their naval assets and demand unconditional surrender. If a ground campaign is necessary, we'll provide military support. After discussing the situation with General Lucas Alexander, who is the current military governor of Kronus, we can agree with your offer of dividing this continent as we discussed earlier. Vale changed the topic. However, it must be noted that upholding that part of the deal will be dependent on our potential success in convincing the Imperium at large to honor the bargain. That much is understood. While we can respectively speak for the Neferu dynasty and the Necron presence on Kronus, you can't necessarily speak for the human Imperium at large. Amarkun conceded, technically we can. What we can't guarantee is that other imperial authorities won't declare us traitors, and the agreement we are negotiation, void and null. The female elaborated. We'll need to get into contact with the subsector, sector and at possibly segmentum leadership and get their agreement to guarantee that local authorities will follow through. In some respects, this sounded as bad as the Necrons themselves, while the silent kind wasn't around. On second thought, it sounded almost the same, which gave Amarkan a new appreciation about what he was dealing with. He would need to prepare envoys to deal with the humans, perhaps send one or more with Vale to keep him alive and monitor the situation. As a bonus, any such envoys will be able to gather precious information about the galaxy at large, the human Imperium, and any new threats. Next on the agenda is the relationship between Imperial forces and authorities and their Necron counterparts. Inquisitor Vale decided that it was for the best to push through with the negotiations. The alliance we're negotiating is between the Necron Lord of Kronus, Herald of Victory, and myself, Amarkan the Gatherer, Nemesis speaking for the Neferu dynasty. We can offer codes that will designate you as potential allies to our own allied dynasties and facilities, thus potentially avoiding unprovoked hostile response. We are in no position to speak about other Necron dynasties. You should keep in mind that being identified as our allies will force a hostile response from several rival dynasties. Amarkan explained carefully, trying his best to put it in such a way the primitives would understand. Our alliance isn't with all Necrons across the galaxy. It is with your groups in particular. Once again, Vale proved why Herald deemed him almost worthy of friendship. Granted, considering that the Inquisitor was primitive, with all that entailed, the bar was much lower than usual, but it was still notable. One of the things we will require in exchange is military aid in neutralizing hostile dynasties, or Tomb Word, who had been crippled beyond repair by the passage of time. We agree that you can recover any human technology and artifacts found in such locations, while we will take possession of ours. That's acceptable, provided that we have adequate forces in the area, and that the rest of the deal is approved by other Imperial authorities. Vale agreed without blinking. Amarkan had to give the humans this much. Negotiating with them was quick and to the point. If this was a typical affair between two dynasties, they would still be arguing useless trivia surrounding the first point of discussion and continue doing so for a long time to come. Chapter 16, Parts 3 and 4. Chapter 16, Tenuous Pacts. Part 3, General Alexander's HQ, Victory Bay, Kronus. Can someone explain to me what just happened? General Alexander walked tiredly into the briefing room we used for the negotiations, but only after we were done, the lucky bastard. Amberley's Scholar and Scipio were in their own world, surrounded by all kinds of data storage devices, good old-fashioned scrolls, and at least a metric ton of velium. They were busy scribbling and muttering to themselves. We have an agreement in principle, I explained, while Amberley was draining her second glass of Amasec as if she just crawled out of a desert. What's this, then? The general waved a scarred hand with few obvious bionic fingers at the table we sat at. What wasn't covered by data storage and velium barely held several Necron devices, their gifts of goodwill, and because I helped Herald against Skulltaker, losing an arm in the process. Incidentally, now there were 2 necrodermis arms on the table, supposedly ready for implantation. Gifts. Amberley twitched. I know many Inquisitors who would kill for this. She waved at the table, who have in fact killed for less. I also know a lot of people who would shoot first, ask questions later if they see someone wearing that. I'll appreciate an explanation. How likely are we to be shot by our own people because of your inquisitorial shenanigans? I believe this isn't something too much to ask. He joined us at the table and produced a large metal cup from somewhere. Then he mugged Amberley's bottle. Well, it's like this, I explained, while my fellow Inquisitor went to pour herself another drink before the guard could drain her precious Amasec. We got through the major points of the alliance quickly and with minimal bargaining. As expected, the real sticking point there was that the Necrons offered more than we could accept, which was idiotic in itself and made me almost despair for humanity. If the Emperor watched this, he might be weeping or shaking holy terror with his rage. What almost torpedoed the whole initiative were various smaller details the Necrons insisted on. I was sure those things might appear very reasonable from their Xeno viewpoint. From where we stood, on the other hand, their minor requests were anything but minor or trivial. All those issues centered around one simple fact. You want us to do what? To give her credit, Amberley didn't quite screech at the suggestion. It was even enough to get Scipio and Mott to pay attention and look beyond the storage devices that until now took their whole world. Is it not normal to send diplomatic representatives and offer liaisons? Amarkun asked. His confusion appeared genuine too. I knew that sending diplomats and representatives was a normal thing when system governors, and even the nominal leaders of whole sectors, cut deals with their peers. However, those were humans. There are a few rare precedents that Ordo Xenos or rogue traders occasionally use. It involves a great deal of paperwork, and it is no protection against more traditional elements in our society. Inquisitor Vale tried to salvage the situation. She means fanatics you can't reason with, I explained. What he said? Amberly. The term is sanctioned Xenos. As long as the paperwork is in order and the alien remains in the company of an ally who can both vouch for them, it is technically possible for, she grimaced, friendly aliens to operate in Imperial space. While it happens, it is not a pleasant experience for anyone involved. I'm afraid it is almost a guarantee that sooner rather than later someone would offend or attack your representatives if we go that way. We can take care of ourselves. Amarkun waved away Amberly's worries. We'll have our cryptex talk details and arrange the paperwork later. Now, about liaisons with you two. The Necron Lord kept rolling as if everything was right in the world. Trazyn already has his eyes on your pariah child, Inquisitor Vale. Because of that particular problem, we decided that her reward for foiling him would be a permanent security detail. I was sure that if he could, Amarkun would grin at me and pat himself on the back for a job well done. The worst thing was I was tempted to accept. I must stress that sending diplomatic representatives with us to local imperial authorities will be a bad idea at this time. Amberly tried to be the voice of reason. However, I must admit more security for the child won't go amiss. She added sweetly, Wait, what? Then it is agreed. We'll have the permanent members of the Pariah Selene's Guard in place shortly. Herald of the Void clapped once and sounded almost happy. Next minor point, not of diplomacy but honor, is your well-being, Inquisitor Vale. He pointed a metal finger at me, so there would be no mistake, I guessed. What about me? It wasn't like these negotiations were currently the greatest threat to my continued survival or something, right? At least this time I managed to keep my odder thoughts to myself. That was surely progress. You, Inquisitor Vale, keep losing body parts during combat, and you keep getting into personal combat. Analysis of your past actions leads us to believe you will continue to do so. Despite recent developments, Herald jabbed that offending fingers at me again, this time at my wings in particular, which ruffled in irritation. Sooner or later, you'll get your head cut off, rendering you useless. This simply wouldn't do. With negotiations practically complete, I must insist you take a Necron liaison with you. He'll facilitate communication with any other of our kind you might run into, and do his best to keep you in one piece. The same goes for you, Inquisitor Vale. By all accounts, you two are among the more reasonable among your kind. It would be in our best interest to keep you intact to facilitate future negotiations. Amarkun added. The security implications alone, Amberly spluttered. There was that angle too. Consider our offer an incentive to upgrade your data security. It is practically non-existent. Both Scipio and Mott spluttered at that. Well, the Adeptus Mechanicus might like the challenge and give them something else to focus on. Perhaps this idea had some merit after all. Then we have an understanding. We'll have your liaisons in place by this time tomorrow at the latest, Amarkun declared. Something in the way he said it made me think there would be no more discussions on this particular topic. And I looked at Amberly, who looked like she just swallowed a whole lemon. We will do our best to make this arrangement work. However, I must stress this point. We can't make any guarantee on how other human authorities or individuals would act towards your representatives. For 10,000 years, every human had been taught to loathe, mistrust, and hate the alien. Such things can't be ignored or overcome easily, neither easy nor fast. We understand and won't hold you accountable for the actions of others. Amarkun hurried to reassure us. Was it just me, or did he kind of radiate smugness and condescension? Bloody Xeno! At that point, I had a thought. Perhaps your liaisons might use a disguise. If successful, such a gambit can spare us all some trouble. Amberly perked up at that. It might work. The same goes for your diplomatic representatives. A disguise might reduce the odds of random attacks. This is acceptable. The Necrons immediately agreed. We will instruct our agents to prepare appropriate disguise before reporting for duty, Amarkan declared grandly. Now that the principal negotiations are over, we can proceed with offering gifts. There was no mistaking it. Herald sounded positively gleeful now. Inquisitor Vale, honor requires you to receive an appropriate reward for risking life and limb to aid me during the battle against trans-dimensional entities. From now on, designated warp abominations. Herald waved a hand and his guards surged forth. They locked their weapons on their backs and items materialized in their hands. First, I'm honored to present you with the hyperphase sword you used to vanquish the entity known as Skulltaker. A huge leering Necron walked gracefully in front of me and offered me the hilt of a familiar sword. The only difference was the crossguard. It was now in the form of the imperial double-headed eagle. I'm honored to accept. As a matching gift from the Neferu dynasty, a shield. Amarkun apparently didn't want to be outdone. So the next time you might not lose another appendage, he declared happily. Sure enough, now there was another Necron in my face, offering me a large slab of dark green metal covered with symbols almost identical to those on Amarkun's regalia. Those are magnificent and humble gifts. I nodded happily. First, the gifts were great. Second, even if they were, I wasn't about to tell them that and fuck up a barely acceptable deal. Scratch that. My smile froze when they offered me a pair of metal arms each, as spare parts. If necessary, we can offer you new legs. Herald kept talking while I stared at the necrodermis limbs. My colleague is simply speechless from the consideration you offer him, Amberly spoke in a honeyed voice. I feel compelled to thank you on his behalf. Lord Amarkan, Lord Herald of Victory. I can see why. He expects to lose his legs too soon, doesn't he? Herald of Victory nodded in understanding. Worry not. We've taken his odd tendency to misplace bits and pieces during combat. Behold, our cryptex crafted armor to help keep him in one piece. The Necrons in front of me put the spare arms on the table, then more items materialized in their hands. Those were pieces of dark meal armor. Most of it looked utterly normal, bless the Emperor. A breastplate to keep vital parts functional. Amarkan ignored my stunned disbelief. It is inscribed with heraldry proclaiming your deeds so far and your status as a friend of the Neferu dynasty and the Kronus Research Center. And anyone of ours who could read this would be doing their best to shoot me and ask questions never. Then there was the helmet. The first thing I noticed was the stylized symbol of the Inquisition etched on the forehead flanked by two small ornate skulls. The eyes glowed green, and the whole thing was shaped like a Necron head, because of course it was. I am left speechless, I managed to croak. The back of the chest armor can retract and fold to account for the wings too. One of the cryptex pipped up. However, I was in no state to respond. If anyone saw me in this away from Kronus, they would declare me an abominable Xeno or a traitor with predictable results. ATBS course. To summarize, we agreed not to shoot at each other so we can shoot at other people, General Alexander began. They'll help us remove the Tau from Kronus, offer technical expertise on developing our own version of their anti-warp technology as well. He took a long pull of his cup as if the Amasec was regular ale. So far so good. You are going to have Necron infiltrators as part of your retinues trying to keep you alive. I don't know what to say about that. Better you than me, I guess. Good luck not getting us all shot by Sector Command. The Emperor knows that would take a miracle. My thoughts exactly. It might be worth it if the pylon technology spreads. I shrugged. Why aren't you drinking? Alexander glanced at me with suspicion. Thanks to these, my wings waved at him, and the rest of the Emperor's blessing, I can't get even a buzz from any normal amount of alcohol, I admitted. And wasn't that a kick in the nuts? I needed a drink, damn it. Part 4. Ares Badlands, Kronus. As far as the Eldari could see, there were dark dunes. Only an odd piece of weathered rock jutted out of the desert, not yet ground down to fine dust. This was a dead and desolate place. It had been this way for a long time. The ranger could feel it in his bones. It was a bad place, and he wondered if it was just because the demon buried below the dunes. Only hard-trained patience, worthy of his rank, kept Rohan from demanding a status update. That in itself told him much. This forsaken place was playing with his nerves. Besides, it wasn't like he would be the first to know if the warlock finally found the prison. There were only a handful of Aeldari in this part of the continent. Rohan, the warlock doing his thing, and the grav tank crew. The last group were the best off, enjoying the relative comfort of the sealing machine. The small band of Aeldari was alone, surrounded by silent Jungir, no Necron, drones, and the odd human patrol. Rohan had to remind himself how he thought about either group, even hinting that the latter were mere beasts, and the former still slaves of the Citan could lead to otherwise avoidable issues. Achieving more than he already had was a very long and tricky shot, one Rohan felt compelled to make. He still got his fellow Aeldari out of the potential blast radius, leaving him with barely any support. At any rate, it was going to be worth it. No matter what happened from now on, his troops were where they could do the most, back home. Or on the way there anyway. The question plaguing Rohan was simple. How did he derail the alliance between humans and Necrons? He knew how not to. Providing them with a target to unite again was what got them into this disaster. He wasn't going to make them target him. Rohan thought about spreading strife. Attempting to play upon the humans' hatred about everything different might have worked. If Taldir didn't ensure they would trust one of their kind even less than usual. Staging a false attack to get the allies to fight each other might have worked in another time and place. Here, the human leaders had the disturbing ability to be reasonable and see beyond the dogma they were raised on. The Necrons were as bad, if not worse. They also had the whole contingent covered with surveillance devices. Rohan didn't trust what little warp sorcery he had in his possession against the scrutiny arrayed against them. Perhaps someone like Eldrad might have had the skills and cunning to pull off something sneaky and underhanded enough to work. Rohan wasn't the ancient Farseer. The ranger kept looking over the desolate desert. His eyes automatically scanned for the tiniest sign of trouble and found nothing. Perhaps that was the answer. Do nothing. The humans were self-destructive at the best of times. How would the rest of their kind react to the news of an alliance with the Necrons of all beings in the galaxy? There might be something to this idea, not only because following through with it didn't require a pointless suicide, but because the humans were self-destructive, crude creatures. The more Rohan thought about it, the more he found the prospect enticing. At worst, he might have to stay around and bide his time to drive a blade through the Alliance's heart. Meanwhile, the humans and Necrons alike would be useful for at least one more thing, seeing the destruction of another demon. And that was a topic Rohan was doing his best not to dwell upon. The destruction of warp beasts was nothing new. Many powerful Aeldari warlocks and Farseers could smite down the less powerful monsters for good under the right circumstances. Some weapons could bring the end to almost any Neverborn, though those were exceedingly rare these days. What Rohan found disturbing was the possibility to see the process industrialized by the Alliance. That should have been a good thing if the tools necessary couldn't as easily cripple his people. Those Necron pylons were an extreme threat, and not only because how they made it almost impossible to draw power from the Sea of Souls. It was the moments of peace Rohan felt under their influence that made him shy from thinking about them, because if he let himself dwell upon it, it could easily grow into an obsession. And so Rohan the Ranger sat on top of a tank, gloomy, pondering dark thoughts, until his warlock acquaintance finally succeeded. "I've got it," the older man exclaimed and jumped on his feet, from where he sat cross-legged on the hot sand. It was protected by some impressively powerful and vile sorcery, but I got it now, the warlock crooned. He even shook his fist in the air in a great show of emotion. On a closer look, Rohan could perceive all the energy thumping through the warlock, more than it was safe for anyone of their ability and experience to channel. The warlock let the power go with visible strain and regret, and looked at Rohan. The walls separating the Sea of Souls from this rock are becoming stronger with each passing moment, and the light of the human emperor keeps the Neverborn at bay. The warlock explained, I didn't risk our souls in order to get it done faster. He sniffed in disdain. That's a relief. Lead the way. The warlock pointed north and jumped on the tank. A moment later they raced low above the dunes and a swarm of Necron drones formed above them. The warlock led them to a nondescript part of the desert. The only difference was that there were a few more ground-down rocks sticking out of the sand than average. It's right there. The warlock pointed forward. Are you sure, Eldari? A deep mechanical voice came from all around them, and the face of a Necron materialized from thin air beside them. I know what I'm talking about. I can clearly see the site. The warlock focused on the empty patch of desert, and his hand fell upon the hilt of his blade. The prison's entrance has been breached, and not too long ago. If you want to commit a glorified suicide, be my guests. Otherwise, stand by. Deployment of containment forces is underway. Rohan didn't feel like dying today, but kept that thought to himself. We'll wait. That was all he said. Soon many Necron forces teleported in, including a number of their large hover transports carrying pylons. Inquisitor Vale and his pariah child will be en route soon. Do not make any threatening gestures their way, or you will be annihilated, the Necron announced. Rohan didn't need more than a glance to conclude that the forces surrounding his position were more interested in containing the Eldari than fighting anything that might come out of the prison. The distressing factor was the Necrons didn't lack forces to throw at the Neverborn, either because more and more kept coming. He was sure that by the time the humans arrived, ancient death machines would cover the desert. In this case, Rohan would have very much preferred to be wrong. As if that wasn't bad enough, soon the humans arrived on board a large, noisy, and undoubtedly smelly red transport that roared through the air before landing nearby. 10 of their space marines walked out, backed by a pair of small Necrons. Only then the Inquisitor made his way out, and Rohan stared. The insane human war armor craft in the visage of the Necrons themselves, wielded one of their swords, and to make things worse, the Inquisitor had a shield proclaiming their friendship. The Jungir and their Necron slaves didn't have friends. Even free from their star gods, the Necrons were little better than the Neverborn. Did they subvert the local humans? Was this the grave threat Eldrad foresee? The Inquisitor turned his head towards the Eldari. Then Rohan saw that even the human wore a helmet shaped in the form of a Necron head. That human was lost, that much Rohan was certain of now. The ranger used all his training to calm himself down in the face of the enemy. This wasn't the time for foolish actions. He couldn't follow in Taldir's footsteps. Doom awaited at the end of that path. The world froze. Walls slammed down, reinforcing reality itself and pushing back the sea of souls. The constant connection with She Who Thirsts nearly withered, and her ravenous presence felt so far away as if it was only a half-forgotten nightmare. Rohan was vaguely aware that the Necron pylons pulsed with power and glowed green from the strain. He saw the warlock stumble and fall to his knees, likely in relief. The humans and Necrons alike ignored them and marched through. Rohan focused on the mission at hand. He could now see where the entrance hid. He could see a few larger boulders that weren't there a moment ago, and between them was a crudely dug-out tunnel. Necron warriors, human Astartes, and the Inquisitor marched inside, heedless of what they could find. Rohan gathered everything he was and pushed through the piece, attempting to overwhelm him with its alluring promise. The ancient enemy let him pass by, though a group of them fell in formation around him. They could cut him down at a moment's notice. Rohan kept walking and gripped his rifle so hard his fingers ached. He followed the impossible allies inside, through darkness, blood, and fallen corpses, until they reached a ritual chamber full of bloodless corpses. That's the place, all right. The Inquisitor's voice sounded distorted and machine-like, almost like a Necron's. Where is the bloody demon? Rohan wasn't sure if he should be happy, cry in relief, or curse his luck. He was even less sure why he agreed to accompany the humans to their city. For that matter, it was a mystery why he later ended attending a crude and particularly boring ceremony carried out by the red-robed technology worshippers. Oh, right. At that point, Rohan would have done almost anything to keep the peace and quiet surrounding his soul. Chapter 16, Parts 5 and 6. Chapter 16, Tenuous Pacts. Part 5, Victory Bay. Kronus. Random tingles went up and down my new arm, while my shoulder itched something fierce. Originally, I had thought that there would be almost no circumstances under which I would consent to let someone fuse a Necron arm to my body. Recent events changed that particular calculation in a hurry. While the primary threat, subversion, was very much something to worry about, the potential threat vector changed. All it took was a report from Karam. The Necrons didn't need physical contact to infest some poor bastard with mind-shackle scarabs. Releasing those tiny horrors in the general vicinity of anyone without proper countermeasures would be enough. In that regard, everyone who leaves Kronus would be screened both after boarding one of the Imperial ships in orbit and at the final destination, including us Inquisitors. Or should I say, especially us Inquisitors. Of course, this bit of intelligence didn't mean the Necron gifts were safe, just that they didn't need them to subvert us if and when they turned on us. That's why, when the news about finding the demon's prison arrived, I agreed to get myself a new arm in a hurry, to go along with the rest of the gifts. The Necrons looked like they approved of my choice, though it was hard to tell. According to Amberley, I was a reckless fool. However, every little bit would help when facing a demon. There was just one immediate problem with my hasty choice. The demon failed to materialize. We found traitor corpses inside, and while void of blood, they were more than fresh enough to tell us what happened. Closer examination of the area by General Alexander's Psykers and an Eldar warlock pointed at a ritual taking place while the final assault on the Deimos Peninsula was underway. The only surprise there was the fact that an apparent greater demon of Khorne had chosen to return to the warp instead of trying to ruin our day. The current theory was that it fled because there was no prospect of glorious bloodshed. If it manifested within that Emperor's forsaken desert, the Navy would burn the region to the mantle, denying it combat, blood and skulls anyway. Instead of finding and fighting a demon, I returned to Victory Bay with a few Eldar stalkers in tow. I still wasn't sure why they came. I was merely being polite, all right, trolling the bastards with an invitation to come to visit and witness the official signing of the alliance between the Imperium and our new Necron friends. They weren't supposed to accept. Amberley wasn't happy. My security detail was even less happy. General Alexander looked at me as if hoping he could give me all the shit details he could think of until I died of old age. The Necrons might have found it hilarious. The Eldar ended up with a huge security detail to protect them from the locals. Said detail had at least one unit of Necron warriors attached to it, who went out of their way to be polite and helpful. No one knew what to make of it, including the Eldar. At least Selene liked the flight and meeting new people. Thinking about it, the Eldar might have accepted because they were afraid I would sick her on them otherwise. As a consequence, I was beginning to regret my inability to get bloody drunk. On top of that, I suddenly didn't have any pressing duties to attend to, so no distractions either. That's how I found myself in the Blood Raven compound, visiting Antaeus, who finally got himself a new arm as well. I found him at the apothecarium and explained my current predicament. Inquisitor, I'm not sure if I should congratulate or pity you. My large friend peered at me from a large metal slab that passed for an operating table around here. Meanwhile, an apothecary waved all kinds of scanners over me, looking for unpleasant Necron surprises. The Blood Raven found nothing, not that, was saying much. Tell me about it. Pray say, do you nice fellows have alcohol that works for you? If so, I would love to borrow a few bottles. After the last deployment, the first 3 companies of the chapters were declared dry. However, we might have a bottle or two of Fenrisian ale in the reliquary. The apothecary rumbled. I looked up at him questionably. That's one of the few good ways to keep space wolves off your back when they become rowdy. High doses of sedatives help as well. Something whirled in his gauntlet and a huge needle poked out. However, those are much harder to administer. Bribing them causes fewer headaches for everyone involved. I'll have a word with the captain when I'm out of here. Speaking about leaving. Antaeus looked at the apothecary. You will sit right here for a few more hours to confirm good graft and no residual corruption. The apothecary pointed the big needle at Antaeus's chest. I'll leave you to rest then. Keep safe, Inquisitor. For what's worth, I know you've got the Emperor's blessing to guide your way. Keep a stout heart, no matter what. I nodded at his words while my wings preened and fluttered. It's a good thing we aren't a chapter of the blood, or I won't hear the end of it. The apothecary grumbled, looking at my wings. They're insufferable around saints. You're still alive. Amberly peered at me in a manner very similar to the way Antaeus looked at me earlier. This time it was Karam whirling around, poking me and whistling in binary as if it was the Sanguiner. No mind-shackle scarabs that I can detect, the Magos biologist proclaimed. While I would prefer to open your brain and check directly, remote scans will have to do for now. He sounded disappointed. Karam was obviously still salty. I got him arrested. You know what? I don't care anymore. Just do me one single favor. Amberly smiled at me in a very unnerving fashion. It was unnerving enough that my wings tried to spread around me in a protective posture, and I had to consciously hold them back. What do you wish, Inquisitor Vale? I asked politely and attentively. Stand down and don't do anything that might get us shot until you're no longer my problem. And it's not like I go out looking for this kind of trouble. Besides, there are only 2 things on our to-do list in the foreseeable future, I reasonably pointed out. We sent feelers to the Tau to see if they were willing to negotiate and would deal with them soon if they failed to respond. The other thing was a standing invitation to attend a Mechanicus ceremony tomorrow when they would finish excavating the Titan cannon. We would attend it, of course. It would be the polite thing to do. The propaganda department would love it, and so would the crowds. In theory, unveiling that weapon would serve as a reminder to everyone watching that the Imperium didn't deploy its most destructive assets to Kronus. Just stay out of trouble, or I'll leave you to deal with the next Inquisitor who turns up alone, Amberly threatened. Magos, what can you tell us about your patients before my colleague summons more problems on top of our heads? The Cryptex tried an obvious solution. They sent deactivation codes. Unfortunately, they didn't work on Trazin's mind-shackle scarabs. Our current theory for removing them is to suspend them using energy fields, then physically get them out, while fixing any damage we might cause in the process. There are obvious downsides to this approach. It can cause permanent memory loss, among other issues. The Inquisitor might need implants to repair her afterward. We can provide those. Of greater concerns was a deep scan provided by one of General Alexander's psychers. Necron scans offered a partial corroboration. Inquisitor Greyfax's memory has been modified by psychic means. The Necrons don't possess the means to do so. It had had to happen sometime before she ended up in Trazin's hands. I might be able to help. My wings twitched eagerly at that. These come with various new abilities I'm still learning about. However, it might be best to try after you've removed those things from her head. I don't know how they'll react to a psychic intrusion. I won't be just looking, but pocking around. We'll make a test run on the Corporal late tonight. Karam continued, ignoring my input. After that, we'll decide how to proceed based on experimental data. The best-case scenario is we'll begin treating the Inquisitor tomorrow evening. Our current projections show that with Cryptech aid, it should take no more than 12 hours to remove the devices, or it will if we're on the right path. Carry on and inform us of any relevant developments, Amberly ordered. She pointed at me. You're with me. It's high time we began writing a comprehensive report for the local Inquisition conclave. We'll have to figure out a good way to explain all of this to our reinforcements. The next group should arrive in the next few days. So much for finding the time to properly go over the user manual of my new arm. It was supposed to have several built-in functions I had no idea how to use at this time. Part 6. Victory Bay, Kronus. The propaganda department went all in. Priests from all over the region arrived early in the morning. They led steadily growing crowds until the streets were packed to bursting. Incense and blessed oils burned, covering nearly a quarter of the city in billowing clouds of smoke. In all of this, a single long street was mostly empty, with whole infantry regiments lining the road and keeping the rapturous onlookers away. What should have been a relatively simple ceremony became the centerpiece of a victory parade. Today was going to go down in history. The only question was how. 3 PDF regiments headed the parade. The local boys and girls marched with pride to thunderous ovations. A veteran infantry regiment came next, calm, composed, and gleaming thanks to their polished carapace armor. Officers, commissars, and sergeants marched in front of infantry blocks, while military marches came to life thanks to Mechanicus's efforts. Hundreds of modified servo skulls floated above the crowds transmitting the music, while even more of the gilded devices buzzed around, carrying burning incense. Flags fluttered in the light wind, either waved by the citizenry or rippling around the walls of buildings as far as the eye could see. Banner-bearers marched proudly at the head of every formation, leading the way. A trio of Aeronautica Imperialis craft roared through the sky, the only operational pair of lighting interceptors and a single painstakingly repaired bomber. Again and again, they flew above the parade, executing the ancient missing wingman formation for every lost pilot during the fighting to save Kronus. The armor came next. All kinds of light vehicles drove slowly, so everyone could see them, followed by the armored fist of the Guard, its tank formations. Seals and decorations covered each vehicle, displayed their accomplishments for all to see. Right in the center of the formation rumbled the Baneblade. It was freshly painted, blessed and sanctified after the fighting on the Deimos Peninsula. Nearly 1,000 purity seals, blessed by 100 priests, covered its hull. From where I stood, surrounded by various local dignitaries and guests, I could see ghostly shells fueled by faith around every vehicle. Those constructs protected their crews and machine spirits from chaos corruption. As soon as the vehicles appeared, all present Martians began their chants, uttering prayers and litanies praising the Omnissiah's gifts. And beside us, standing on a hastily but carefully constructed scaffolding, stood the prize of the day. Draped with huge red veils, countless seals covered it, and it nearly swam in steaming sacred oil. Dozens of Martians surrounded the massive Titan weapon and prayed to it. I could see Celine in a lower corner of the stands, sitting on Sergeant Bronn's shoulders and waving at the parade. From time to time she would look shyly up, as if to check if I had vanished. Not a few meters away sat our Eldar guests, a warlock, the crew of a single tank, and Rohan the Ranger. Their armors did an excellent job hiding their faces, however I could feel their bubbling emotions. And they were delicious. They knew what today represented and probably could detect the Necrons hiding around us, watching everything. The Emperor's radiance still bathed Kronus, and I hoped it was a sign that we were on the right path instead of making a terrible mistake. It was too late for second thoughts now. The pact was sealed. We did that early this morning at General Alexander's HQ. It was simple and to the point. What we were doing right now was a show for the citizenry and the military who might have to work with the aliens in the future. It was also a message, one we were sending loudly and clearly to our Eldar guests, their masters, and the Tau who undoubtedly watched. The Baneblade slowly rumbled past us, with Colonel Roval waving at the crowds from the top of the cupola. He looked positively tiny, which served to reinforce the sheer size of the super-heavy tank. It had to drive slowly through the street, or it would risk clipping one of the troopers, keeping the crowd from doing something stupid. The mob itself kept screaming itself hoarse, yet their cries of joy didn't splutter out. Their jubilation was almost contagious and resonated through the warp. Their raw emotions flowed straight into it, and under the Emperor's cage, there was nothing to poison those feelings, or consume them. I knew it wouldn't and couldn't last. However, those of us with the senses to see had the privilege to experience the immaterium, how it was before the Eldar murder-fucked and tortured it into insanity. Frankly, for a moment, I didn't know if I could hold myself back from lashing at Rohan and his party on general principle. My mind pulsed with the echoes from the emotions of hundreds of thousands. Their faith flowed into me, first like a trickle, then like a small river, which passed through on its way to the Emperor. My wings shone brighter than ever before, and soon a soft golden glow surrounded me. This only fed back into the crowd, which went wilder. I took a moment to look over the stand, trying to distract myself from the emotions bombarding me. General Alexander and his party were to my left, with Captain Thule and some of his commanders towering behind the guard officers, just like Antaeus stood above my shoulder. Amberly and her retinue were to my right, between the Eldar and me. Local notables stood around us, basking into the glory and screaming their support as loud as they could. Many of them were even genuine in their jubilation. I made mental note to point out those who weren't to Amberley and the Arbiters. The Baneblade came to a ponderous stop right in front of the park where the Hellstorm cannon stood. So did 20 Lehman Russ tanks and 4 Bloodraven Predators. A pair of dreadnoughts heavy with seals of all stripes walked by until they flanked the super-heavy tanks like an honor guard. Binary chanting rose in volume and the music changed. A hymn to the Omnissiah silenced every other sound in the city and even the crowd. S quieted down, straining to listen and see. Thanks to a pneumatic system, our stand slowly rotated, so now we faced the Titan cannon. Heat haze covered it, and the holy oil smearing it bubbled. Even some of the purity seals covering it began to smoke. That wasn't right. I narrowed my eyes at the immense weapon. I could sense my fellow Psykers warily let out their senses spread through the immaterium as well. There was something here that didn't belong. A foreign presence that was simply wrong, and it was stirring. The Emperor's light shy, one here, and the concentrated prayers of a whole world bathing this place stood ill at ease with whatever that thing was. The Eldar Warlock figured out something first and recoiled as if struck. It was deep within the cannon, entwined with its components, hidden and slumbering for eons. Yet now it stirred, irritated and weakened by a power that was anathema to its very existence surrounding it, pushing it down and containing it. Soon it was going to awake. My wings went out to their full spread in a threatening posture. Rot and decay assaulted my senses. Corruption and nihilism practically radiated from the heart of the cannon. Now that I saw them, I couldn't unsee. I couldn't understand how could such a thing remained hidden, instead of making every Psyker on the continent vomit and choke in revulsion as soon as they touched the warp. Sweet, merciful Emperor, what did those crazy bastards dig out?